everybody, welcome back to my channel. For today's video, I really want to focus on Jessica De Laurentiis. Ultimately, of course, the A's are the villains in the show, but I personally think kind of the underlying villain of the show is Jessica De Laurentiis. Everything kind of comes back to Jessica's actions from even like pre-Allison disappearance kind of have this huge butterfly effect of basically most of the future events in the show. To be honest, Jessica De Laurentiis to me is actually a really underrated character in terms of kind of the villain aspect of her and the mysterious atmosphere that she kind of brings to the show. As a human being, she's a very terrible person, do not get me wrong. Look, Jessica, I normally support women's rights and wrongs, but I don't think I can back you here. I'm sorry. Jessica, I fear that you might have girl bossed a bit too hard. Don't know if I can back it. Do you know what I mean? Jessica's character as a whole, she brought this really cool atmosphere to the show within kind of the mystery aspect. And kind of whenever I saw Jessica, she was always like kind of up to something, but like we didn't really know what, and there would be other characters in the show that would kind of warn us of her presence. Obviously the Hastings would warn Spencer that they can't trust the De Laurentiis family, especially Jessica and Jason. So there was this really cool, like, mysterious tone to her character, and I think as a villain and as a character, I think she's hugely underrated. In the show, when sometimes you need a bit of a break from, you know, maybe the main characters here and there, to have Jessica on the screen was really kind of refreshing, because amongst kind of the A mystery, you had whatever mystery was going on with Jessica and kind of the De Laurentiis family. And throughout the entire show, you're kind of like, well, does Jessica know who killed Allison? It's kind of alluded to the De Laurentiis have so many secrets, and Jessica kind of knows them all, and she's like trying to keep them a secret and trying to protect her family. And we're trying to uncover what these secrets are. And just the fact that we have so many warnings towards her, I think is really cool, because we're like, okay, because you have all of these warnings about her, but when you actually see her on screen, she actually comes across quite nice most of the time. I remember there was a really nice scene with Emily when Emily came out and Jessica was kind of saying how proud Allison would be and how proud she is and things like that. That was a really nice scene. So to the audience, Jessica's actually portrayed in a really, really nice way. So that's why it's shocking when we hear stories from other characters about actually the true kind of person that Jessica actually is. But my main point of this video is I personally think everything is kind of Jessica's fault.
Oh, that's no.
In the sense that in terms of like everything kind of goes back to Jessica De Laurentiis. I mentioned in my last video I had a few sayings about the show. One of them is that all roads lead to Radley. All roads lead to Allison De Laurentiis. But my third one that I didn't say in the video was that I think all roads lead back to Jessica De Laurentiis, because especially when we go back to the pre of the show when Jessica was younger, her actions then have influenced a lot of stories that happen in Pretty Little Liars. So ultimately her actions led to a huge butterfly effect of, you know, dangerous things that will happen in the story. She's always a character that has just really interested me, because I think there is so many layers to this character, and the actress who played her did a phenomenal job. And I really think the writing for Jessica was actually done really, really well. I criticize the show a lot, but like I love the show so much. It's just, I love talking about it. But I will give them the thing that I think the Jessica thing was perfect. Like actually perfect. And I think even when they killed her off, I think it was the perfect time, because if Jessica would have stayed on, then the show wouldn't have kind of all the lies would have just been unpacked right there and then. I don't know, I think it was kind of perfect, and I think it was perfect also with the way that she died. I know that Cece didn't kill her, obviously, but the way that Cece buried her alive being the same way that Jessica buried Allison alive. I think it's really full circle. And I think Jessica's story and the way they wrote her, obviously it's not perfect in terms of like she's a perfect character, but it's perfect in terms of how they did it and how they portrayed Jessica. And I do think as a character, she's hugely underrated. I think Jessica is like the puzzle piece, like the missing piece, or just like the main piece, or like the last piece of the puzzle that you put into it. Because without Jessica, there actually is no Pretty Little Liars. Like I said, and I'm going to explain, everything starts at Jessica. If there's no Jessica, and probably no Peter Hastings as well, there isn't really a show, and like none of this really would happen. I think on Pretty Little Liars, the most interesting characters to watch were kind of the villains. So that's why I really enjoyed like Mona, for example. Mona's my favorite character, and Allison kind of disappearance when we saw her through flashbacks. Villains are my favorite characters to watch. I think they're really interesting, especially on a show like Pretty Little Liars. So Jessica was so fun to watch because there was so many aspects of her character that like as an audience was so creepy about her. And kind of every time she came on screen, I just got kind of goosebumps because it was like, what is this woman up to? Like, what has she got on these people? Because like I said, when she's presented to us, she's presented in a really nice manner, like just like a mom doing her thing and being nice to the girls. But then underneath that, there's obviously so much more to her, and I just find it so interesting. So obviously we have to go to the night that Allison disappeared, and Jessica was a huge part of this night because Cece obviously hit Allison and Jessica buried Allison alive. I always found it really weird how Jessica didn't actually check if Allison was dead or not, and it made me think, if Allison had survived, like, you know, Jessica took her to a hospital or whatever and survived that way, would Allison have something on her mum, and then Jessica would have to confess about Cece? It made me think, do you think that Jessica knew Allison wasn't alive, but knew that the burying her alive would ultimately finish her off in a way to protect her secrets about Charles and Cece? Because I feel like the first thing you would do is check if your child is actually dead. We obviously know she wasn't dead and she was breathing and she was calling out. So I feel like that is actually a much darker situation than it was, because kind of on the first layer you have Jessica protecting Cece, and I quite like that aspect of Jessica because although it always doesn't appear on screen, Jessica will go out of her way to protect her children, and she obviously buried Allison to protect Cece, but obviously she kind of screws one daughter over to protect the other. But the concept of her protecting her kids is very much there. So I feel like it could be much more darker than kind of we actually think, because like you would check if they're breathing, right? You would check for any sign of, you know, chest moving up and down, or even checking a pulse or anything like that. I feel like you would do that. So it really did get me thinking about maybe Jessica actually did that on purpose to keep her secrets hidden and to protect Cece. Because also Allison didn't see who had hit her. So even if Allison had survived and, you know, Jessica took her to the hospital and everything was fine, it's not like Allison would know about Cece, because she didn't know that Cece was the one that hit her. And Jessica, you know, obviously saw the person, but Jessica could have lied and been like, oh yeah, but they were in a mask, I didn't see, or something like that. I feel like there was other routes to go down. So I feel like this was kind of the first time for me where I was like, oh, okay, Jessica's definitely a lot more darker than we think. Obviously burying her child alive is obviously very dark, but I think it goes even further than that, and it's something I've not really thought about before. But when I was kind of researching this and getting my notes ready, it kind of dawned on me, like, I feel like it would have ended a different way. Do you know what I mean? Also, it's quite interesting, the other mums really aren't as close to Jessica as they are to each other. I feel like the mums at certain times mention her and things like that, but they themselves seem quite hesitant about Jessica and quite, I'm not going to say they're scared of her, but I think there's that aspect kind of lingering. And that's really interesting to me because it's kind of like, well, do these mums know more than what we knew at this point? Pam was maybe the closest, and I think I remember hearing Pam was more, she mentioned Jessica more than the others. But all of the other mums kind of just raised suspicions about Jessica. And I find that really interesting because the mums were obviously really, really close. So to see even them kind of distancing themselves from Jessica was really, really interesting. Maybe they wanted to leave her alone with her grieving, but I feel like you would want to be there for someone who had just lost their daughter. Obviously, Veronica knew a lot more than we knew. Veronica knew a lot of stuff that had happened, which I will get onto. But like the other mums, like Ella and Pam and Ashley, they definitely mention Jessica and they do, you know, interact with her and things like that. But it's not like how they interact with each other. And I found that's something I just picked up on. I think was really interesting about it. We weren't really sure with Jessica what we would get because in some flashbacks, Jessica would be really cruel. I remember there was this one flashback where Allison is playing the piano. Jessica kind of slams down like the lid of it and nearly catches Allison's fingers. But then, like I said, there's other scenes like when Emily came out and Jessica was really supportive of it, where she's really nice. So you never really knew kind of what you were going to get as well with Jessica. It was a very kind of like flip-flop of a character type of thing. And then in season 4 there's a scene where Jessica is like staring at Spencer just like through a window, and like that is adding so much, just like the jump scares with Jessica. I remember season 6B and 7 where Jessica had died before this, but they used, Mary Drake and Archer used masks, or I guess for Mary Drake they didn't need to because Mary Drake and Jessica are twins, but Mary would dress up as Jessica and cover herself in dirt, jump scare Allison. And like those were my favorite scenes of, you know, kind of post CC reveal, because even when Jessica was dead she was still kind of haunting Rosewood and kind of haunting her children through kind of the eyes of Mary Drake. And those jump scares, when I say the writers were writing, Marlene King, you got paid that day. I'm sorry. They knew what they were doing with that, and that was like some of my favorite scenes. I loved it so much because it actually made me scared. Like it made me feel so much tension and so much like this is just all gonna explode. Like it actually physically made me jump out of my skin. I loved those scenes. As a parent as well, Jessica is very confusing because, like I said, she does a lot to protect her children. She will ultimately protect her children. Obviously, Cece was not her biological child. However, she went out of her way to protect Cece. And she would protect Allison as well. And I think that's why she was so harsh on Allison, because she wanted to protect her. But Jason kind of got pushed to the side. I actually quite feel really bad for Jason. I don't think he was ever loved by his family, to be honest. And that's really upsetting. She would protect her children, but it would be through kind of dangerous actions and quite like outbursty actions from Jessica. But at the end of the day, she would screw her kids over to save her other kids. But I feel like the intention to protect her children is very much there. She's went around it in a not so good way. Do you know what I mean? But I think the intention to be a good parent is there from Jessica. But ultimately, I think Jessica's childhood and upbringing was very rough, and Jessica doesn't really help herself either. And I feel like that impacts her children. And ultimately, I kind of see, you know, kind of how Jason and Cece and Allison, the people they were, I get where they got it from, type of thing. I know Cece's not her child in that moment, but Cece and Jessica spend so much time together. Like, for example, there was another scene where Allison wasn't getting her own way, and she said that she would stop breathing and turn blue unless she got her own way. And I feel like that must have been adopted from Jessica and kind of the life that Jessica had given her kids. And then we obviously have the Bethany Young situation, which really cemented Jessica for me as kind of like the trigger for everything that kind of happened, because Jessica got close with Bethany at Radley, and she would take Bethany and Cece out on little like play dates and things like that. And then one time Jessica asked Bethany to call her Aunt Jessie, and Bethany really didn't like that, because Bethany had found out that Jessica was having an affair with Bethany's dad. So Bethany ultimately felt lied to, and from then on Bethany would talk really badly about her in kind of like voice recordings, and she would draw Jessica with devil horns. Bethany was kind of the catalyst for kind of Cece's hatred towards her. And the night that Allison disappeared, Bethany obviously had the connection with Cece because Bethany had killed Mariam but had framed Cece for it. And then the actual night that Allison went missing purely was because Bethany was trying to get revenge on Jessica De Laurentiis, so came after her, and that kind of triggered the entire night and everything that kind of went wrong with that night. And Jessica literally like started it. She started that whole thing, and without Jessica it probably would not have happened, and therefore Allison would have probably been fine, and Pretty Little Lies itself does not happen. We then obviously find out the secrets that the De Laurentiis and the Hastings keep within their family. We find out that Jason's biological dad is actually Peter Hastings, because Jessica had an affair with Peter, and Mary one time pretended to be Jessica, slept with Peter, got pregnant with Alex and Spencer. Jessica took away the twins from Mary, and then ultimately that led to Alex becoming A through this whole like butterfly effect type of thing. And then obviously Cece's biological mom is Mary, but once again she was taken away from Mary by Jessica. So Jessica actually had so much to do with like the family tree of the show, and she kind of influenced a lot of that. Alex became A kind of, you know, when she learned about her secret family, and then Cece died, and that's kind of influenced by literally Jessica's whole affair with Peter Hastings, because then Mary pretended to be Jessica. And Jessica, the way that she treated Mary was really unfair and really, really cruel. Jessica did a few things to Mary which I think was really unfair and really vile behavior, but it really cemented her for me as such an underrated villain, and ultimately the villain of the show. Jessica took away Mary's children, so Mary never really got to experience kind of being a mother properly and having her children by her side. And then also we find out that when they were children or like kind of teenagers, Jessica was babysitting and the child died in kind of Jessica's presence. Jessica called Mary to bring Mary over to the house and then blamed her for what had happened. So ultimately Jessica killed a child and blamed it on Mary, and then that meant Mary got sent to Radley, and then Mary couldn't be a mother to her children because she was at Radley. And then Spencer and Alex get broken up, and then Alex becomes A, and then Cece doesn't have her mum as well. And like there's this whole trigger of events that actually really start from Jessica De Laurentiis. And also Jessica dies. The way she dies is actually, it's a bit of a slay from Mary Drake, I have to say. Jessica approached Peter Hastings setting up a plan to kill Mary Drake, and I think Jessica was threatening Peter with the fact that Jason was his son. Jessica was going to poison Mary and kill her. However, Mary kind of she heard about this, and she therefore instead poisoned Jessica and ended up killing Jessica De Laurentiis, all because of the actions of Jessica. And then obviously Cece buries Jessica, and there's the whole connection with that. Literally everything goes back to Jessica De Laurentiis. It's actually insane. So at this stage, I'm just going to read from my notes. At this stage, Jessica has had an impact with her affair with Peter, the conception of Jason, framing Mary for murdering a child, taking away Mary's children, a butterfly effect of Mary sleeping with Peter and Alex becoming A, taking away Mary's twins from her, the death of Bethany. Oh yeah, the death of Bethany. She has some influence in that because it's literally Bethany leaves Radley to get back at Jessica. Affair with Bethany's dad, Allison being buried alive, Cece hitting Allison, covering up the deaths of Allison and Marion. That's another thing. She paid, well, according to the timeline, she paid Wilden to cover up Marion's death. I think it was blackmailing Peter Hastings and then Mary Drake eventually killing her for everything that happened. Like, she is literally the trigger of the entire show. Everything happens because of her. And just the use of them and how they wrote Jessica, like using her face for so many jump scares and just using her presence as such a mysterious, like unsafe presence to be in is so cool of them. I'm so sorry. Like, not to mention she also is very bitter towards Spencer, and I think obviously in hindsight now it's because we know about Mary Drake and Spencer, but she tries to frame Spencer a lot for Allison's murder. I was watching a scene yesterday where Jason is telling Emily that Jessica told him to stay away from Spencer because Spencer's dangerous. She obviously knows what happened to Allison indirectly, and she's like framing Spencer for it. So she's literally going out of her way to blame someone else and potentially get that person kind of locked away for Allison's murder when she knows what happened to Allison. I find that super, like, she's evil and she knows it, but I'm low-key, not even low-key, high-key, I'm eating it up. I really like it. I think there's something quite sadistic about Jessica taking away Mary's twins from her, and one of them becomes A, and then one of them she's framing for murder. Like, she really wants these twins gone. She really does. In conclusion, I think Pretty Little Liars is nothing without Jessica De Laurentiis. I think she is the show. And I think ultimately her actions have consequences, which then kind of have like butterfly effects to future events in the show. And like one thing she does leads to another, and then impacts another thing, and then that leads to another thing. And it's all quite connected to Jessica De Laurentiis. That's why I think she's the underlying villain of the show, because of course we have the A's who are like the main villains of the show, absolutely. But I think the one that's a bit underlying, a bit kind of secret, I guess, and kind of no one really pays attention to is Jessica De Laurentiis, because she literally creates this entire mess, and all of these characters that she creates a mess with become the future of the show. Spencer, Alex, Cece, Mary, Peter, like the whole thing is literally surrounded by her. And I'm not gonna lie, good on Mary Drake for doing what she did to Jessica. I don't know, I feel like Mary Drake was very misunderstood. Like, I don't know, Jessica traumatized her so much, and the trauma that she not only gave to Mary, but to like Peter and Spencer and her children, and like Alex and Cece, whatever, like, is so beyond just like the normal villain of a show that it's like, I feel like someone needs to get her. I truly do. But I just love with Jessica, it always felt like something was building. Something was building with her. We didn't really know what her kind of thing was, like what was she kind of playing at type of thing. And I find that really cool because we never really knew where to stand with Jessica. And my mind on Jessica would constantly change because we're shown this really nice mother and this really nice woman. But actually, when we explore her character and the things that we're told about her and what happened, the things that she did to other people, it's like, wow. Like, she actually was involved in so much of the show in such a big portion of everything that happened in the show. And ultimately, towards the end of the show, especially when everything's linking back to like Cece and Alex and Spencer and whatever, Jessica literally created that. And I think that is really interesting, because not only does it start kind of pre-Allison and, you know, when Jessica was like a teenager, but it continues, and it's kind of like a full circle thing to the very end of the show. She loved her kids. I do truly think that she loved her kids, but I just think she went the wrong way around things on multiple occasions, and there was other ways to do things. But I do truly think that she loved her kids, and she was trying to protect them, even if that meant kind of screwing over the other kid. But I think she was raised in a household that was probably very much like the Hastings household, where like everything had to be perfect and nothing could be out of place. So I think that really impacted her as well, and probably her choices that she made along the way. But I think there was ways to go around it. Like, she could have taken Allison to a hospital and just like gaslit Allison or something like that, rather than like bury her alive. And like the fact she didn't even check, I guess in the moment maybe you might not think of doing that, but I feel like that's the first thing that you would check. Like, is this person still actually alive? Like, can I save this person? I actually like the relationship that she had with Cece, and I think Cece very much needed that in her life, especially because Kenneth kind of tossed her aside, because obviously Cece wanted to dress in girl clothes, and that's where it all started. So I think to Cece, Jessica was really good. I think Jessica truly loved Cece, but ultimately she gave a lot of trauma to a lot of people. A lot of this trauma turned into people's kind of like villain origin story, because she literally tormented, especially Mary. Like, she tormented Mary in so many different ways, and it's quite understandable how mad Mary was, and the fact that Mary ended up killing her. I'm not endorsing it, everyone, but that's why, like, when they revealed who killed Jessica, I wasn't shocked. I was like, well, yeah. Who else would it have been, you know? My ultimate point is, and the whole point of this video, I think Jessica is the underlying villain of Pretty Little Liars, because if you take away Jessica, does the show exist? Do all of these factors intertwine and come to the big conclusion that they ultimately come to? I think not. I think without Jessica De Laurentiis, I think a lot of this doesn't happen. Probably most of it doesn't really happen, to be honest. And I think Jessica kind of caused all of it to happen. That is it for this video. I would love to hear your opinion on this down below. Do you think Jessica was kind of the underlying villain or not? Or do you think there was more to her that kind of met the eye type of thing? I would just love to hear your opinion on this topic. Make sure to like and subscribe, and I will see you guys in my next video. Bye guys.